Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Nothing on this podcast is financial advice. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. With that, enjoy the show. All right, welcome back to the Mike White Podcast. Today I'm joined by Alex Stanczyk. He is the managing director at Swan Private. He's also the host of Café Bitcoin, which you can listen to every weekday on Twitter Spaces, and it is also uploaded in a podcast format. So find that in any of your favorite podcast platforms. I'll have links in the show notes. But Alex, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Awesome. So big thing about this podcast, I like to learn about the person, just see how they got to Bitcoin. And I heard from Greg Foss, the man, he said that you were a Navy vet. So I'm curious of what it was like growing up and why you chose to jump into the Navy.
Sure. So I grew up in Miami, south of Miami. And it's a little bit of a rough neighborhood in the surrounding neighborhoods. There's, when you hear like a lot of the sort of gangster rap kind of music genres came out of two places, basically Compton, LA, and Liberty City, Miami. Well, Liberty City, Miami was like 5 minutes from my house.
Wow.
So, there is that. High school was, I had some stuff go on when I was a kid that was pretty rough, I think, and ended up dropping out of high school, really. But in my junior year, I had signed up with the Navy, and Navy recruiter came by, signed up on the delayed entry program.
Yep.
The agreement was you finish high school and you get a career in the Navy. And I'm like, let's go. But I didn't actually finish high school. So getting out, at one point, I was actually quite depressed. I got kicked out of my house. I was not doing anything with my life. You know what I mean? I dropped out of school, kicked out of my house, nowhere to go, no prospects, I wasn't going to any colleges. I wasn't and then the Navy, which was kind of like we'll take you plan. I was like, well, I didn't finish high school, so I can't do that now either. So I didn't know what I was going to do. A really close friend of mine's family basically said, you can come stay with us until you figure it out. And I went into a deep depression. I was sleeping probably 20 hours a day and really thought that there was no future. And then one day, middle of the day, crashed out. I hear a knock at the door, and I'm like, okay, I don't know who this is, but let's go figure it out. So I go answer the door, and there's two guys standing there in full dress uniforms. One of them's a chief, the other is a first class. And I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble. That's the first thing that went through my brain. I'm in trouble. I'm going to jail because I didn't hold up my end of the deal. And what the chief said was you're going to go to boot camp. So you might as well pack your stuff and get ready to go. And I'm floored. I'm like, holy crap. That's not what I was expecting. I literally was expecting them to say you're being arrested for failure to. I didn't realize at the time I was a kid. I didn't know that was that's not a thing. But I had no other reason why they might show up at the door. Somehow they found me, and I'm like, "Well, Chief, I didn't graduate high school. I didn't hold up my end of the bargain." I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, whoosh, rolls out a paper, and he's like, "We got you a waiver."
Wow.
So, as it turns out, I was one of these kids where it was really school was easy for me if I wanted it to be. I could get an A in a class if I wanted to, really, without trying too hard. I scored over a 96 on my ASVAB. And when I went in to the recruiter, they were like, you can do anything you want in the Navy. You can be a nuclear engineer if you want. You scored that high. And they tried to get me to do that stuff.
I'm sure they did.
You need to do these different jobs. We want you to be either a nuclear engineer or fire control or electrical engineer or something like that. And I didn't want to do any of those things. I just wanted to shoot guns and blow things up, which they were very, seriously, dude, you can do anything, And so I guess they wanted me and they found me, and so off I went.
Were you talking to any of the
And
other
so-
branches? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, originally all I knew from a very early age was that I wanted to be in the military. I knew this when I was like 10 years old. I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to shoot guns. I wanted to blow things up. I wanted to travel the world, blow things up. Like I was one of those kids. I was with my friend. I had my group of friends. We were shooting each other with BB guns, at 12 years old in the, out in the out in the, in the boonies in Florida. So yeah, I knew I wanted to join the military. But the first office that I walked into actually at the recruiting station was the Marine Corps. And the guy wasn't in. Like the Marine recruiter wasn't there, and the Navy guy was there, and he's like, "Hey, well, while you're waiting, you know how this? You probably heard this story before. While you're waiting, you might as well come in here and talk to us." So I did, and I was like, "Man, I don't want to join the Navy. Like, what's that all about? Like, I want to like crawl around in the mud and do the pew-pews and the blow things up thing." And they're like, "You can do that in the Navy too." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." And then he started showing me these brochures about SEALs, and this was way back before anybody knew what SEALs were, because I'm an older than I look guy. This was back before SEALs was a thing, before the public knew what they were. Anyway, it's like, "Oh yeah, there's this thing called SEALs. You can sign up for that." And I'm like, "Okay, show me what they do." And he showed me some stuff, and I'm like, all right, this is a little more my speed. Let's go. So anyway, that's the story.
That's crazy. Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm glad the Army didn't get you, because I feel like that would, jumping out of helicopters and firing a ton of guns, that would be very enticing.
Yeah, it was a close thing. Yeah.
Were you ready for boot camp, or because you didn't even know what SEALs were? Did you have any idea what you're getting?
I had some idea. I mean, I started doing research on what they were, and I was like, "Oh, these guys are like commandos. They're like full on, like in the bushes and the jungles doing the thing." And I'm like, I'm all about it. So, and then you had to meet certain qualifications at the time. They tested you in boot. You have to meet the full qualifications to continue on to buds. And so I was very aware of that, and I trained pretty hard. I crushed the quals in boot. Not that it was like that hard. It wasn't really that hard, but
were you an athlete there in high school? Like, did you do sports or anything?
Not really.
To prepare you for that? Because that's pretty tough.
I've studied martial arts ever since I was 10, and I've always, taken physical fitness pretty seriously. I did it on my own, even though like I wasn't in any team sports or anything like that. I mean, I was at home every day doing the push-ups and the, on my own.
How'd you handle, so if the physical aspect wasn't that challenging, how'd you handle the discipline and the lack of freedom right when you first show up to boot camp?
I thought that was all fine. I assumed it was going to be something like that. I kind of always, I'm not my personality. I'm not a big rule guy. So I always knew that if I wasn't going to end up doing something in special forces, that it would probably be a rub. And it turned out to be true, because I did not actually make it into the teams. I got down checked at one point for medical, because I had this eczema thing outbreak, by the way, which went away and never came back. But it just so happened the timing was that it hit me when I was in boot. Medical, the diving officer was like, "Yeah, you can't go."
Wow.
Was terribly bummed about that. They wanted to keep me in, though, so they offered me a bunch of other stuff, which I ended up doing.
Yeah, where'd they send you?
Stay in. I became a gun. They sent me to gun school, so I became
nice.
in the Navy. It's called a gunner's mate, and you learn the guns, you learn the missile systems, you learn the weapon systems, and so yeah, I stayed in to do that.
I'm glad
it was
you
either
did.
that or go to the fleet as a non-rate, right? Which sucks.
Yeah, you wouldn't be shooting at all. No guns. So, or
maybe. I mean, you'd probably be chipping paint, most likely. Chipping paint, sweeping.
Swabbing the decks.
Swabbing. Yeah, all that jazz.
What was your big takeaways?
So yeah, I did that. What's that?
Go ahead. Sorry. Cut you off.
Oh, after that, I went to C school for the 16-inch gun system. I ended up being I graduated first in my class for all that. I mean, the stuff that I like to do, it was easy. I was an honor grad in boot and the guide on and all that kind of crap. And then I went and graduated first in my class in gun school, or was I second? I don't know. I was one of those honor student, all that other kind of stuff. Went to C school for 16-inch gun system. Went out and got assigned to the USS Missouri Turret 2. And that's what I did for the Desert Storm thing.
Awesome.
That was very interesting.
Were you guys, I mean, I don't know if you can say, but were you out there off the coast kind of ready to go?
Yeah. Like at this point in history, it's all pretty well known. None of that stuff is classified. The operations that the Missouri did anyway. So we offloaded a lot of ordnance downrange during that war.
Wow.
And very interesting time, man.
Did you have any idea? Because it was a pretty peaceful time before. I don't know when exactly you entered, but did you have an idea you're going to war?
We found out when we were in gun school. So I was in gunner's mate A school, and I can distinctly remember we were in class, and they turned the TVs on, and they were announcing that Saddam Hussein was invading Kuwait. And like, the vibe was there at the time. It's like, yeah, we're going.
Wow.
We're probably going over there. And then I went off to San Diego for C school on the 16-inch gun system, got assigned to the Missouri. The Missouri was already on its way. It was deployed in the Gulf. It was steaming north in the Gulf. And I flew over there to meet up with the ship. So, like, it was already, like, war footing. We're sending all kinds of assets over there and at the time. And, yeah, man, I can remember very distinctly. It was January, I want to say 17th, 18th, in that time frame, very close to that. President announces, we're getting busy. And our ship, immediately after that, our captain comes over the 1MC. He's like, okay, guys, this is it. We're doing it. Stand by. We're already at general quarters, by the way, when this was happening, because we kind of had the gist that this was going to go down. And then we started launching Tomahawks, man.
That's surreal. I can't even imagine like the atmosphere on the ship. Was everyone really just locked in?
Yeah, man, people were pretty fired up and ready to go. Like, I mean, there was people were, obviously you get the jitters of whatever, you don't know what's going to happen, right? But, and some people might think, well, you're nice and safe out there in the Gulf on your ship, not so much. They were firing silkworm missiles at us and all kinds of other shit. So, like, we had our moments, but yeah, people were pretty fired up, man, pretty ready to go.
Yeah, no one likes Tomahawks being launched at them, so I'm sure there was some pushback. But how long were you stationed on the Missouri for?
Man, I want to say something like 2.5 years. I decommed her after the war before I got assigned to another command, but something like 2.5 years.
And were you on a 4-year commitment, I'm guessing, or was that the same?
Did you have any 4-year?
Did you have any thoughts of staying in versus re-enlisting, or what your plans were moving forward?
No, you know what? I can remember very distinctly thinking to myself, look, if I can get into a SBU, this was before SWIC was a thing. They called them SBUs, small boats units. Like, if I could get into an SBU, like doing, special warfare crap, inserting SEAL teams, extracting SEAL teams, that kind of stuff, I'd stay. And I literally told the billeting officer at the time, I was like, if I'm going to re-up, this is what I want. And interestingly, 2 of my buddies that I was gunners with did get assigned to SBUs, but I did not. And so, I was done at that point.
Yeah. I
did go to another command, but I was like, short timer.
Was it a short tour or was it a ship?
No, it was a ship, interestingly enough, got redeployed to the Gulf.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
This ship went over there again to do other stuff. And so I spent more time over there after that.
That's
But,
crazy. That's
yeah.
You actually saw some action. That's rare. I haven't met really anyone that is actually in the shit. But
You mean
what?
in the Navy? From the Navy?
Yeah, from the Navy. Yeah, from the Navy.
Yeah.
What big takeaways during your time there? Did you like any big lessons learned that you really cherished, or stuff you saw that you couldn't stand?
Yeah, I don't regret any of it. I did learn a lot from it. I would say that's where I learned that you can do a couple of different things in your life, career wise, or the way you choose your path in terms of how you earn money, that kind of thing. I learned that I did not want to be poor during that time, and if you're on the low end of the pay scale, enlisted, you don't make much money. Those guys don't get paid much at all. And I also learned through some of the physical work that we did that I did not want to probably earn my living that way. If it was possible to earn my living from here up versus here down, I was going to go the here up route after I got out. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons I learned. But I did. I mean, the thing that I enjoyed the most about it really was, as I imagined it would be, the small arms, dealing with small arms, the weapon systems, blowing things up. Sometimes people ask me, do you miss anything about the military? Like, do you miss the camaraderie and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, sometimes. What I really miss, though, is blowing things up. Like fully automatic grenade launchers, things like that. They're fun.
Yeah,
you don't
can't
get to
that.
do them as civilians so much.
No, not on your local gun range. But that's got to be a tough transition. So you have somewhat of an idea, but you don't really know. You're not getting what you want in the Navy. You want to be in the action more, and so you decide to get out. What do you do next? What's your thoughts? How do you transition?
Yeah, so I didn't know what I was going to do, really. Getting out, all I knew is I wasn't staying in.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a plan. I was lost for a little while, did some different sales gigs after that, started my own business in the internet was just starting to pick up speed at this time. I mean, this was back when you were connecting at 48, 2400 and 48 baud modems. And then like when they kept getting faster and faster and faster after that, like it was during that time. And I started a business helping people the business name was Get Connected. Like I was going around helping people get connected to the internet. This is how you set your modem up. This is how you connect it to the internet. This is how you check your email. This is how you do your stuff. Like that's when it was just starting to pick up and become a thing. And then that kind of morphed into working basically as a contractor for companies like Verizon and et cetera in their data centers and doing stuff there, and ended up as the director of IT for the largest aerospace union on the West Coast. I think it's the largest aerospace union in the United States. So I ended up managing a wide area network, multiple locations, data centers, all that jazz.
Did you just go into that knowing the internet was booming and you knew that industry was going to be something? So you learned about IT and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it was more like something that I enjoyed doing. Like I can remember, like to me, the coolest application of computers back in the day was for games. All I cared about is I wanted to play games on these things. This is back when you had to like literally make manual adjustments to how your RAM worked in order to run certain games back in the day and things like that. So I had an interest in computers for that reason, and then I learned about them. Basically, I'm all self-taught. Everything I know is self-taught. Even to this day, it's all self-taught. I broke things and put them back together and figured out how they worked and figured out how networks worked. And like, I did not really think about it as like, this is a great career path for me. I just kind of did it because I had an affinity for it and I knew how to do it. And yeah, it kind of ended up culminating in that career.
That's pretty insane before the YouTube days. And nowadays there's so many resources online, but before the internet, it it seems like it would be very difficult to be self-taught. Were you reading books, or what do you go to?
Well, it was all hands-on stuff. I knew how to get people connected to the internet. I knew how to build boxes. I call them boxes, PCs, whatever. And then sort of getting them all networked in a small business environment was kind of like a next natural evolution. Nobody else knew how to do this stuff. So I was like, well, I'll take a shot at it, and figured out how it worked. And it was usually one of these things where it's like, I just happened to be the guy that knew more about it than everybody else in that small circle of whatever was happening. And so it just led to more and more sort of complex network understandings of how networks operated and all that kind of stuff. And then, that's kind of how that all worked. I mean, I can remember very distinctly at one point, like when I was interviewing for this one position as the director of IT, I knew a lot of stuff, but there was a lot of stuff I didn't know too. And like the guy who was leaving the position, who was interviewing me, he was like, well, what do you do if this happens? I'm like, well, I don't really know. He's like, well, why should we hire you then? I was like, well, I'll tell you one thing is that I may not know the answer to that question, but I know this. If you give me time and resources, I will figure that out. There's never been a technical problem I couldn't figure it out. Just let me hack at it. Right?
I love that.
Yeah, and the guy was like, all right, that'll work.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they say, oh, I do this. They just fake confidence when they really don't know, and that can end up really bad. That's what they stress that in the Navy big time is don't be afraid of I don't know, but I'll find out type thing. I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
So how do you're the head of or the director of IT there, and I see on your resume that you helped found a gold fund or a precious metals fund. How does the IT world shift to like finances?
All right. So this is a really weird transition. So while I was the director of IT at this organization, on the side, as a side gig, I launched this technology company where we were developing basically video over, it was peer-to-peer video over IP. So kind of like this was way back, before BitTorrent was a thing. This was like Napster, Kazaa. It was kind of like between the Kazaa evolution to BitTorrent days, right? And I connected with some really smart engineers, and there was this idea that we were gonna build a peer-to-peer way to stream video, and we built this prototype and got it up and running. And I can remember this was before YouTube and Netflix were streaming video online. All right, and I had arranged to meet with the executives of Netflix to show them this technology. We're like, we got the meeting. We went in there. We're going to show you a demo. We demoed the technology for them. I'm like, look, this is the future of the internet. All video is going to stream. It's not going to go the way you guys are doing it. And we literally got laughed out of the office. The guy was like, nah, we don't do that. We ship. This was when Netflix was actually shipping DVDs in the mail. That was the business model. Right?
I remember that. Yeah, I was a customer who was getting excited when he saw the Netflix in the mailbox.
Yeah, it was a funny time, man. And so we were early. 2 years later, Netflix is streaming video over the internet. We were just early, I guess. But I ended up selling out of my part of that business, and essentially, this was when some really weird stuff started happening in Washington. Kind of the writing was on the wall for the weirdness that it is today. And I was like, I want to get out of here. So took what we earned from doing that, left the country, moved to Panama, Central America for 11 years, 10 years, 11 years. And the original plan was I'm just going to sit on the beach. I'm going to lay in a hammock. I'm going to drink beer, wake up late, hang out, have a good time. That got boring within 60 days.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know how people do this. I've got friends emailing me and stuff. They're like, oh, you're living the dream. I'm like, this is boring as hell. What are you talking about? I don't know. I met some guys that were involved in the gold bullion industry. Got to know them pretty well. Ended up founding this gold fund. Ran that for 8 years.
You just meet him on the beach?
So basically, what's that?
You just meet him at the beach while you're chugging beers on the sand, and the gold fund guys come by, or was that more like internet networking?
It was kind of a weird series of circumstances that I'm not going to get into. But
okay.
Long story short, we ended up as friends. And like
awesome.
Late one night, we're out at I had this place that was in this area called Veracruz, and it was up on the side of the mountain, basically in a jungle, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And our families start hanging out on weekends, and they like come over, and me and this guy stays up till late into the morning hours, like 3 a.m., whatever, drinking wine, bullshitting around. And that's how we got started. This is actually how I went down the red pill rabbit hole.
Okay.
It's because up until that time, I always thought the system was broken. I just didn't know how. I couldn't put my finger on what was broken about it. I just had a sense that it was broken. I can remember even in high school looking at my teachers thinking, these idiots don't know what's going on. There's something weird happening here, and they're teaching us to learn all this stuff because we're going to apply this in our life.
Yeah.
But that's not what's happening here. I even knew back then that there was something wrong. I just didn't know what it was. So I always thought growing up in high school, I always thought, if I ever make 6 figures a year, I'm going to be so rich, so rich. And I can distinctly remember when I started making that kind of money, as a director of IT for that company, I was thinking, okay, so I'm making pretty good money, but I'm not rich. What gives? What is the problem here? And it wasn't until I started hanging out with these guys who were in the gold industry where they started explaining inflation and monetary inflation, how the money debases, and every 10 to 12 years, the prices of everything basically doubles. If you've got, let's call it a 2 to 3% rate of inflation. Well, I guess it would be a little bit higher, but the point is, I noticed every 10 to 12 years, so to speak, in my lifespan, certain things were doubling in price.
Yeah. And
I was like, man, there's no way that incomes are going to keep pace with this. Like mathematically, that's a broken system. And it was back then when we started going down that rabbit hole where they explained it to me. I was like, man. So I sold all my property in the U.S., bought gold, and anybody who would listen to me, I was like, you should maybe think about buying some gold. Because at the time I thought, this is the only way back to any kind of honest monetary system, right? This is before Bitcoin.
Yep.
And then, so that's what happened there. And then.
Did you have any influence by Ayn Rand? I know I consider myself a gold bug because I got into Ayn Rand and learned about Austrian economics and the money speech in Atlas Shrugged, where he talks about how it's your receipt of value of productiveness, and it's ideally that paper is backed by gold. I don't know if you have read that passage.
Yeah, I've read parts of it. And there are a lot of different influences I had when I was in the gold industry that had similar impacts on me. Just researching stuff that the Rothschilds said, and like mind-blowing things. There was a book written by a guy by the name of, if I'm remembering it correctly, Ferdinand Lips, I think. Gold Wars is the name of the book. And this guy was one of the directors of the Rothschild Bank in Switzerland.
Okay.
And just mind-blowing things about how money works that really shaped my view and kind of helped me realize that the modern economic system is designed as a wealth transfer mechanism. The whole thing is designed as a gigantic wealth transfer mechanism. And as long as you keep the rate of inflation low enough that people aren't like alarmed by it, you can keep people working for 40, 50, 60, 70 years of their life, and they'll never figure it out.
Yep.
It's mind-blowing stuff to me.
That's why I think I'm surprised when you hear the people that get that, a lot of the gold bugs, like Peter Schiff, and they see Bitcoin, and they still don't think that solves the problem. Do you have any hypothesis why that is?
Yeah. I think they're suffering from sunk cost bias. is what I think. Because
Yeah.
look, if you're honest with yourself and you look at things objectively, in my opinion, if you study what Bitcoin is, you must come to the conclusion that it's better money. It's better money than gold. And I can give specific reasons as to why that's the case. And it's also unique in humanity's history in ways that make it the most perfect money we've ever seen. So I think, there's a handful of guys in the gold industry that are similar to a Peter Schiff, where they've just got their entire life invested in it. They've been doing this for decades, and they have tremendous amounts of wealth and time and energy wrapped up in that narrative, basically, is what it comes down to. Where a man's time and treasure is, there his heart is also. So how is it possible for a person to basically say, yeah, look, all that stuff I've been saying for the last 30 years, I was wrong. Like, this thing is actually better.
You figured it out. You saw the orange pill path forward. And so what was the big aspects of Bitcoin that made you realize gold is great, but Bitcoin is better?
There were a couple of sort of seminal moments in that pathway. Like I was aware of Bitcoin in 2011, and I, like a knucklehead, I didn't take it seriously. I kind of just laughed it off, and I was like, whatever. It's interesting, but it's not gold. That was my attitude.
Yeah.
And continued to not take it seriously for a really long time. In 2015, I think I bought $500 worth of Bitcoin. And I think I did it through Wenceslas's Zappo. I think it was Zappo, I guess, at the time. And then lost access to the wallet. And I completely forgot about it. I'll come back to that because there's an interesting thing that happened afterwards. But so 2015, bought $500 worth of Bitcoin, lost the wallet, forgot about it. 2017, the U.S. dollar price of Bitcoin passes $1,000 per Bitcoin, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Like, it's like literally almost equal to an ounce of gold, and it got my attention. So I bought some, and I sat on it that whole year. And the whole year, interestingly enough, even though I had bought some, I was making fun of it. I was like, this is so much nonsense. Like, it's just so much nonsense. And then at the end of the year, I sold it near the top, like it was like near 18.5 or something like that. And I patted myself on the back, and I was like, Alex, you're so freaking smart. Well done, sir. You did great. Because this thing's a gigantic bubble, right? I even wrote a paper about that. I'm like, this thing's a bubble. You guys are retarded. Like, it's a Beanie Babies, pet rocks. We are never going to hear from this thing again. In my paper, I'm like, there's Denny's strippers talking about Bitcoin in the parking lot. This is a gigantic bubble, all right? Denny's stripper. No, there's strippers talking about it in the Denny's parking lot, not Denny's strippers. Anyway, point being, I was like, it's done. Like, it had its run. We're never going to hear from this again. So fast forward to 2019, I had forgotten about Bitcoin, wasn't paying attention to it. But in 2019, I just start looking at the charts, and I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, this thing is consolidating. And it's going to run again. And I think the price was around $8,000-ish at the time, maybe 10, somewhere in that area. And I was fascinated by this, but here's the part that really bugged me is that I didn't understand why it was still around. I thought for the longest time, and this is one of the reasons I never took it seriously in the beginning, because I always thought the government will just stop this thing anytime it wants to. This thing, it's inevitable that the government puts a stop to it, right? But it hadn't. It's 2019. I mean, how many years is it after are we into it by then? Like almost 10 years. It's almost 10 years old at this point. All right? And I'm like, why has this thing not been stopped? And I started doing research to answer that question. Like, I did not understand, why hasn't the government just shut this thing down? And after a couple of thousand of hours of like seriously digging into it, I came to realize, they haven't shut it down because they can't. It's too late. It's too late. You might have stopped it 5 years ago, maybe. But now, There's no way to stop this thing. And then I went down the rabbit hole, researching it 2019, researching it through 2020. 2020, here's the last nail in the coffin for me. I'm still managing my gold fund. COVID hits. Lockdowns happen. In Switzerland, they ground all the airplanes for like 3 weeks. And that's when it hit me. I was like, holy crap. If one of my clients called me today and they said, Alex, I want you to deliver X numbers of millions of dollars of gold to this country over here, I literally could not do that.
Yep.
And that's when it occurred to me, man, by the way, in the gold industry, that is what you call a failure to deliver. If you have a failure to deliver, you're done. Right? Your reputation is gone. And I realized that in order for gold to make final settlement, it requires the cooperation and permission of other human beings. It's a physical thing in the physical world. Humans can stop it. They can steal it. They can take it from you with force. If you don't, in my case, if I didn't have the cooperation of the guys running the vaults, the guys driving the armored trucks, the body armor guys, the dudes with the rifles, customs, if I didn't have their cooperation, the ground crews could have screwed it up. The air crews could have screwed it up mid-flight, you know. There's flights that just disappear over the middle of the ocean. Nobody knows what the hell happened to those things.
Yep.
You don't know. Same thing on the other side. And here's the thing. Whether it's large scale, what I call institutional scale in gold, or small scale. Like whether I'm delivering, let's call it 10 metric tons of gold, or whether it's a guy like trading a kilobar of gold for something out of the trunk of his car in a parking lot with some other guy. The truth is, humans can stop that and steal at any point they want to. Right? Like if you and I are in a parking lot, some dude could just roll up on us and be like, hey, thanks for the gold. Right? But with Bitcoin, and I realized this at the time, I could send any amount of value to the other side of the planet at the speed of light at almost no cost. I need no one's help to do it, and no one can stop me. I need no one's permission. That was the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, crap.
And just the cost of the transportation too, like all those people you have to hire, and then just the fuel cost of getting it from Switzerland to, say, Los Angeles would be insane.
Yep. All of the above.
Would you put this, I'm still trying to get the lingo down, but like counterparty risk, is that all considered counterparty risk, or is that specifically for banks?
Counterparty risk basically means if your counterparty or any other person or company involved in helping you complete your transaction fails, then your process has failed based on counterparty risk. Yeah.
And that's what I always hear Greg Foss talk about as everyone. It's a no-brainer to hold Bitcoin, at least as an insurance policy at the very least. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Greg puts it in the context of an insurance policy. I think we're at the cusp of going beyond that at this point, because Bitcoin has enough of a track record now where it is literally just destroying every other asset in terms of performance, that if you don't put some small allocation into it at this point, it's not even insurance at this point. It's like you're being a bad fiduciary manager. You know what I mean? Like you're being bad. This was also part of my journey from gold to Bitcoin. You know, like at one point, and I think this might have been around 2019 that I did this, I thought to myself, all right, well, I was buying gold in 2007 at $650. If I sold it today, I did the math, I would have made about a 272% gain. Not bad, doesn't suck, right? However, I did the same math with Bitcoin, and the number was in the tens of millions of percent. Tens of millions. Like an objective person, if you're a gold guy and you're being truthful with yourself, that these numbers aren't lying. It's the math is the math. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just a mistake. If you have zero Bitcoin, in my opinion, like do a 1% allocation. Do enough that, my opinion, because people ask me this, like, how much should I put into Bitcoin?
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you don't understand what it is and you're not sure, put enough that you care enough that it's going to cause you to learn more about it. Don't put more than you're going to be uncomfortable with, right? Even if that's 1% of your portfolio or whatever it is, just enough that's going to cause you to want to learn more, because you should. Like for example, if this thing actually is what the Bitcoiners say it is, right? This thing is going to evolutionize mankind. This is an evolutionary step. This is my belief. Bitcoin's an evolutionary step function in mankind's trajectory. If that's true, shouldn't you look into that? Like if they're wrong, if the Bitcoiners are all wrong, you put 1% of your portfolio and you do the research and you find out, they're full of crap. You've pretty much lost not much, right? But if they're right, I wouldn't want to be the one making that mistake.
I agree. And I just saw an article from Macro Jack. It was on OnRamp's newsletter saying relating this time to the gold rush back in the day. But it's so much easier to get invested in this than the gold rush too. Like you had to go across country and dig in mines, and then here you can just hop on Swan and click a few buttons, and ideally eventually shift it over to your hardware wallet, and you got Bitcoin self-custodially.
Yeah, there's no excuses. I mean, there's so many platforms today, whether it's Swan or any of the other. I mean, there's so many platforms and so many ways to do this. Like you can literally buy $20 worth of Bitcoin. You have no excuse. Like, just don't drink lattes for 3 days in a row.
There's a lot of people that don't.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, but they see the price of Bitcoin is like, I don't have $30,000. I can't buy Bitcoin. A lot of people have that number bias, and they don't even know what sats are that you can divide it. So there's still a lot of education, I think, that needs to happen.
100%. And for those of you who listen to this who don't know what Mike is talking about, you can break each Bitcoin into 100 million Satoshis. So think of it like this. You have a dollar bill, you have cents. 100 cents in a dollar. There's 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. So today, as it stands right now, you could buy over 3,000 Satoshis per dirty fiat dollar, per dirty US dollar. You can buy over 3,000 Satoshis. So if you invested 20 US dollars into it today, that would give you, what would that be? 60,000 Satoshis. Yeah.
At what number of price of Bitcoin are you going to be spending all your time trying to recover that paper wallet that had $500 on it?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. So a year or two ago, I get a letter in the mail, and it's from Zappo. And I had completely forgotten this thing even existed. And they're like, hey, we have 25,000 US dollars worth of Bitcoin in your account. You either claim this or we're giving it to the state of North Dakota where you live.
Nice.
And I was like, yeah, I'll take the Bitcoin. Thanks.
How do you claim it? Did you have to have your seed, or because it was all on that exchange, you didn't even need like a pass or a key?
Yeah, well, it turns out that they actually liquidated cash and sent me US dollars, which I then turned around and bought Bitcoin with. But here's the interesting point for that story. I had initially bought $500 worth of Bitcoin and I forgot I had it. And it was like, when they contacted me, it was like 25 grand. Pretty cool.
That return, can't math in public, but that's a lot. I don't know what the exact number multiplier is, but
yeah.
I also wanted, before we finish up the podcast, I want to talk to you about podcasting, because you've been podcasting even before Swan. You were doing it with your gold fund, and that was kind of before podcasting was mainstream. So I was wondering what your decision was to jump into that.
Well, at the time, it was mostly just because we did this thing called the Gold Chronicles. So it was me and Jim Rickard. Some people may know who that guy is. And it was at a time where I was just wanted to learn as much as I possibly could from this particular guy, Jim Rickards. So it was a once a month thing where he and I got together, and I got to ask him questions, and it was a learning process for me. And we were digging deep into gold and economics and geopolitics, and I think he enjoyed talking to me about stuff because as a prior military guy, I have a certain perspective on life, as many guys who've been in the military do. And so it was just a really interesting kind of back and forth, and learned a lot about podcasting. Well, for me anyway, not that it was a huge podcast or anything, it wasn't, but yeah, that's why I did it, and that's what I learned a great deal from it.
What have you learned along the way of these years of podcasting, that maybe any tips or tricks?
Yeah, just I would say just what you're doing is great. You know, if you can find people who have life experience that you can learn from, that's pretty invaluable. That's what I do on Café Bitcoin all the time. Like, there are some things that I know about, but there are many, many things that I'm not an expert in. And I get surrounded by super smart people from the Bitcoin ecosystem all the time. And, you know, one of my favorite things to do on that show really is not talk, but just learn from them. And my Bitcoin knowledge has grown massively in the last almost 2 years that I've been doing that. And I'm very thankful for it.
Yeah, I just recently found that one, and I can't believe it took me this long, because you guys have great guests, and I like the frequency of every day being consistent, and so I'll make sure it'll be in the show notes so everyone can check it out. And I heard on one of a podcast you were on recently, you were talking about the Weimar Republic in Germany. Are you writing a book on that, or where you said you were reading one? I couldn't really tell.
Reading.
Okay.
There's several books I have on that topic, but it's very fascinating to me to see how humans behave when their money is literally collapsing in value. Like, it's a very interesting process to watch. I mean, it doesn't happen super often, but when it does, man, it is wild.
Yeah. I always lead with inflation. If I'm talking if someone asks me about Bitcoin, I always go the inflation route. I don't know if I've never successfully orange pilled anyone though, so I don't know if that's the right way to do it. What's your tactic if you meet someone and they start asking you about Bitcoin?
It always depends. For me, it's always different. Like, to me, I just try to figure out where they're coming from and what their interest is. Like, there's this saying, you know, you bait the hook to suit the fish, so to speak. So I really want to find out what that fish wants to eat in particular. What are they interested in? What are they like? What matters to them? And if I can find that out, then maybe I can talk about subjects that might matter to them. And then from there, if I can just get them curious, that's the way. The other thing that I like to do that works great is just have them install a Moon wallet on their phone, MUUN, and just literally right there on the spot, shoot them some sats.
Yep.
And when it comes across, you just let them know, look, Visa, MasterCard was not involved in that. There was no bank that's involved in that. That was me sending sats directly to you. Sure, it goes over these lightning nodes or whatever, but no one stopped us, and that costed me like 9 cents.
And even if they don't understand it then, they might have the similar experience that you had, where a few years down the road, they open up that app, they see their balance, and it's just skyrocketed. And that might make them go down the rabbit hole, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. That $20 or $10 or whatever I sent them is now worth 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 or whatever it is.
Bearish.
Yeah.
Bearish. Well, Alex, it's really been a pleasure hearing your story and getting to talk some Bitcoin. I just want to hear if you have any final thoughts on Bitcoin or anything you want to talk about before we close it up.
Yeah, I mean, just last thing I would say is, if you're wondering, if you're curious, just take the plunge. You don't have to do it with a lot. I mean, like I said, you can buy $20 with Bitcoin and learn about it, get to know it, understand it better, and just go from there.
All right, I love it. And I'll stick with Odell. Stay humble and stack sats. And you guys follow Alex on @Alex Stanczyk, STANCZYK. It'll be in the show notes on Twitter. Also, he's on the Bitcoin Veterans podcast, and they have a Twitter that we'll have a link to. And thanks for joining us. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok @MikeWhitePod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.